Hey, welcome back everyone. So a few months ago I did an overview of the Turkish K.Kale Model 38 rifle, which was Turkey's first domestically produced military rifle and a derivative of the Mauser Model 98 large ring design. I went a little into the background of the rifle's development, the Ottoman Empire, and subsequently the Turkish Republic's relationship with the Mauser rifle, and its program of recycling old stockpiles of Mauser 1893s and 1903s and upgrading and converting them to this standard Model 38 configuration, and then eventually manufacturing their own rifles in the early 1940s, known as the K.Kales. So what I'm going to show you today is a side-by-side comparison of a converted Turkish 1893, a converted 1903, and a domestic production Model 1938 that have all been updated to this Model 38 configuration, what cosmetic changes were made on each model, and how you can tell the different conversions apart. If you're more interested in learning about Turkish rifles in their original configurations, I suggest watching Othias's videos on those over at CN Arsenal. They're super well done, and I use those overviews to help put this video together. Some of what I'm about to say is a bit redundant from that earlier video, but it's important context in order to understand the rifle's lineage, especially if you're watching this for the first time. I also want to preface this with a note about the terminology surrounding the Model 38 configuration. This was never an official designation used by the Turks themselves. These old refurbished Ottoman rifles are contemporarily referred to as Model 1893 38s and the Model 1903 38s by collectors in order to associate them with this new set of standardization. It's 100% a collector's term given to them by US importers. Even today, if you see a converted Turkish Mauser for sale, you'll see many different names used in the listings. Is it an 1893/33 or an 1893/38? The name itself is less important than the actual features on the rifles, so you'll need to pay attention to those if you plan on getting into this area of collecting. The prefix and the names are just to help show you what the original base rifle was before it was refurbished by the Turks. As a recap, Turkey was one of those countries that was heavily reusing and recycling old rifles and parts. Beginning in 1930 and 1931, Turkey launched a program to upgrade and convert their Model 1893s and 1903s to a common cartridge, the 8mm Mauser, and to a common set of characteristics. This was cost effective and let them recycle their current stockpiles instead of having to purchase brand new rifles from abroad. Anything that was usable was refurbished, and you'll find a wide variation in these conversions. So today, I'm going to show you what was added, what was removed, or upgraded from each model during the conversion process. So from the top to bottom, we have the 1893/38, the 1903/38, and finally the K.Kale Model 38, which was the newly produced Turkish rifle. As the world was stepping into the era of smokeless powder in the 1880s, the Ottoman Empire adopted a number of export model rifles purchased primarily from Germany. They lacked a domestic arms industry and didn't have the financial prowess to develop their own, so they preferred to procure arms from abroad. There was a wide variety of other models that the empire purchased, but for this story I want to focus on these two export models that would eventually become Model 38 conversions. After adopting several Mauser models throughout the 1870s and 1880s, the Ottomans were fairly impressed with the new Spanish Model 1893, which was being manufactured by Mauser Oberndorf under Ludwig Löw and Company in Germany as an export product originally for Spain. So the Ottomans went ahead and placed an order for just over 200,000 of them chambered in 7.65 Belgian instead of the 7mm cartridge which the Spanish were using. Another change from the Spanish version was that they wanted a magazine cutoff included, which would have originally been right around here. And production of the Turkish 1893 order took place between 1893 and 1896. Now, in 1898, the Germans made significant improvements on the 93 design with the introduction of the Mauser Model 98. It was a cock-on-open design, had a large ring receiver, it included a thumb cut in the receiver wall, it had an extra safety lug in the rear of the bolt, extra gas escape holes, and so on and so on. It was designed with safety and a stronger action in mind. The 98 would become the standard hallmark rifle up to the end of World War II and beyond, as many of you are already quite familiar with this. Well, the 98 was soon adopted by many militaries around the world, with the Ottomans being one of the first international customers for this new design. The Ottoman 1893s were fine rifles, but by the late 1890s and early 1900s, the Ottomans had been involved in a number of conflicts in the Balkans, and they simply needed more small arms. In 1903, the Ottomans placed an order for a 98 variant rifle that would subsequently be known as the Ottoman Mauser 1903. Between the purchase of the 1893s and 1903s and other prior models, the Ottoman Empire became one of Mauser Oberndorf's largest customers, and those orders kept them pretty well financed for many years to come. Now, the biggest differences between the Ottoman 03 and 93 for the purposes of military use was the magazine cutoff, weight, and cock-on closed design. Of course, the 03 was a large ring receiver design with a cock-on open bolt, but this probably didn't impact the day-to-day combat of the average Ottoman soldier. Both rifles were quite effective and deadly instruments of war that served the empire well in the First World War, as they were regularly seen side by side. Well, after the conclusion of the First World War, the sun sets on the Ottoman Empire. Turkey's post-war military is now left without any standardized service rifle, but instead a large number of different German-made rifle models in different calibers. Out of the ashes comes the Republic of Turkey, led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk as its first president. Ataturk's administration implemented a number of liberal, cultural, and economic reforms, including a modernization of their industrial economy. In 1923, Ataturk's administration reorganized the Ministry of War and formed the General Directorate of Military Factories, which oversaw the production of Turkey's military armaments. This eventually led to a modern and standardized small arms industry that Turkey could rely on, and which oversaw the massive conversion of rifles starting in the 1930s. Then, starting around 1938, in order to supplement their need for additional small arms, Turkey expanded their arsenal manufacturing capacity in Ankara to produce newly domestic rifles we call Model 38s or K.Kale 38 rifles. They also didn't stop using spare parts after this period, so you'll still find 38s with a mix of used German and Ottoman parts and other leftover features. Now, something that I thought was interesting as I started to do more research on Turkish rifles was that even though the 1903s and K.Kale 38s are based off of the German 98 design, they all cosmetically look like Model 1893s. At a glance, they all look pretty similar until you start looking at their close-up features. We don't know why they didn't make the 1903 front barrel band, bayonet lug, and front sights the same specifications as the German Gewehr 98s, but I suspect it was for continuity reasons, like being able to use the same bayonet pattern for all their rifles. Now, without further ado, let's take a closer side-by-side look at all these rifles, and I'll even show you some of the differences between the Spanish 1893 and the German Gewehr 98s. Alright, taking a very quick look at some of the differences in the charging bridges. One thing you might notice right away is that the Model 1903 and to some extent the 93 have these tall and more pronounced charger bridges. This was because the original clips the Ottomans were using were smooth-sided, in contrast to the 8mm stripper clips that the Germans were using, which had these dimples in the side to help them bite onto the bridge walls. So when they were using these smooth-sided stripper clips, they needed basically a taller bridge to help, fit in and slide down correctly. So it needed to be deep enough to accommodate the smooth-sided 7.65 Belgian ones. Now, when they were converted to 8mm and they started using the stripper clips with dimples, it didn't really change the function, so why spend the extra time cutting them down? It worked all the same. Taking a quick look at the bolt releases here and here, the 1893s and the 1903s have these sort of curved extensions, while the regular Model 38 just sort of has this straight look that we're all pretty familiar with. Originally, the 1893s had no indents for stripper clips and just used this arm to stabilize them, but in the conversion process, you can see they added some stripper clip indents here on both sides. Also, originally the 1893 had no thumb cut, but this was incorporated into the 1903 and 38 designs. It gives you a little bit more room for your thumb to push down the stripper clip, and you can see they made this adjustment on the Model 1893 during the conversion process, and they actually cut out part of the lettering, which I'll show you in a little bit. On the 1903s, they included stripper clip indents, as you can see right here, to make it easier for the stripper clips to go in, and also included a thumb cutout. So modifications on those two weren't needed during the conversion process. On the side of the 1893, it says 1312, indicating the year it was made in the Islamic calendar. That would be 1896 in the Christian calendar. The marking from the star forward on the receiver means Mauser Arms Company, Oberndorf, and then of course it's partially cut off by the thumb cut. Just briefly, the 1893 was a cock-on closed bolt design, while the 1903 and the 38 were cock-on open bolt designs. The 1893s were never converted to a cock-on open design. There wasn't really an easy or functional need to do this during the conversion process. You might also notice that the bolt knob on the 1903 is more of a teardrop sort of shape, while the M38 is more perfectly round. That's another distinguishing feature between the conversions and the newly made K.Kale rifles. Now, taking a very quick look at the receivers, the 1893, of course, has a small ring receiver, which you can tell by this straight wall here on both sides, versus the 1903, which has an upgraded large ring receiver. You can see it sort of goes straight and then bumps up and goes this way. So it's a little bit stronger. Obviously, they kept the receivers the same during the conversion process, so the 1893 is still a small ring receiver, even though it was upgraded to an 8mm Spitzer cartridge. Now, speaking of ammunition upgrades, you can see they cut out slots here and here for 8mm Spitzer cartridges. The 7.65 Belgian Argentine round had an overall cartridge length of 76 millimeters, while the 8mm Mauser had an overall cartridge length of 82 millimeters. So in order for them to fit effectively, they needed a little bit of extra space taken from the receiver, and this is a pretty common practice with all sorts of rifles that were converted, not just the Turkish ones. So you can see, for example, the only way that this could actually fit inside is if they cut out a little piece of the receiver here. Same with the 1893. The 8mm Mauser cartridge, or the 7.92 by 57, was a more widely used cartridge at this time in the world, so I suspect this is why they made that change, and it would be a logistically prudent decision. This is a small point, but near the top of the receiver of the 1893, they originally were fitted with the sort of metal clips that hung over the top, where the upper handguard connects to the receiver, but they did away with those in the conversion process, so the handguard wood actually fits under this metal lip here if you take it apart. It's certainly a bit awkward looking though. Taking a look at the receivers, we basically have a standard repeat of the same design when they began the conversion process. They scrubbed the face of the receivers and replaced them with a standardized set of words denoting the Ankara arsenal where the conversions were taking place. Originally, both the 1893s and the 1903s had Ottoman Sultan's Tugra on the receiver crests. The 1903s, however, had the year they were manufactured, but because it was scrubbed during the conversion process, you actually can't tell the year this particular rifle was made, but likely between 1903 and 1905. Like we showed you earlier on the 1893, the year and manufacturer were on the side of the receiver. Part of it is missing now because of this thumb cut. As you can see, basically they are all the same between the three different models. TC at the top stands for the Republic of Turkey in Turkish. I will not attempt to pronounce this, but I will put it on the screen. ASFA is an abbreviation for Askari Fabrika, which is Turkish for military factory. The city name, Ankara, which you can see here, denotes the province where the factory is located. Now, the only difference here is the K.Kale M38s, which have the word K.Kale, which is K.Kale Rifle Factory in K.Kale, right outside of Ankara. Finally, we have on each of these the crescent moon and the white star. You can kind of see it a little bit here. There's some pitting on the 1893, but I will superimpose better photographs. And this is the national emblem of Turkey. And then the year it was converted, or in the case of the 1938, this was manufactured in 1942. The 1893 and the 1903 were both converted in 1938. So these are later conversions, but they start as early as 1932, 1931, 1932. On the 1893s and 1903s, you'll see all sorts of original symbols and proof marks that were never scrubbed, like crescent half moons, stars, and Arabic lettering. Looking at the rear sights, the 1893s originally had a straight flip-up ladder sight, but those were replaced with these sort of standard tangent sights that go from 100 to 2,000 meters. The 1903 originally had tangent sights, but with a roller coaster style guards and old Turkish numbering, but they were removed and were left with this standard tangent uniform sights. Like we said, the original 1893 had a magazine cutoff, which was removed during the conversion process, By the 1930s, magazine cutoffs had fallen out of use, so they had them removed. Armies originally liked them because it prevented soldiers from expending too much of their ammunition by controlling when single volleys could be fired. But by the turn of the century, it was out of practice. Interestingly, the Turkish 1893 was the only smokeless Mauser to have a magazine cutoff. Taking a look at the 1893 on the top, the floor plate is a little bit bulkier on the bottom compared to other 1893s. Here's a Chilean 1895, which is basically an 1893. But anyway, the magazine cutoff required a little bit more space for the cartridges in the magazine, but there was no need to replace this during the conversion process in the 1930s, so they just kept it. So you can see it's a little bit rounder, a little bit bulkier here, and it's definitely a little bit flatter right here. And this didn't really have an impact on the feeding at all because you still have that spring inside the internal magazine. Now, unconverted Ottoman 1893s originally had a straight line stock wrist, but during the conversion, they were fitted with pistol grip style stocks. You can see how the stock would have originally looked when you compare it with a model 1895 Mauser. Also note that not all 1893s were converted to the new pistol grip stock. So you still see converted 1893s that were not upgraded, but this is one of the later ones which certainly did get that stock upgrade. And then just adding the 1903 conversion on the bottom here, these were manufactured with pistol grip style stock wrists because this is how the Gewehr 98s were. This is how the Model 98 rifles were from here on out. So changed from a straight line to this pistol grip stock wrist. They also added disassembly discs to the stock during the conversion process. You can see here and here, and then I have the Chilean 1895 here for a reference of what it would look like without the disassembly disc. Neither the 1893 or the 1903 originally had that as a feature. Finally, they added recoil lugs in the stocks of the 1893 and the 1903 for extra reinforcement with the adaptation of the 8mm cartridge. Again, you can see what this would have looked like without a recoil lug in the stock. Now, when the Ottomans ordered the 1903s, they kept a lot of the same cosmetic stock features that the 1893s had, like I mentioned earlier. Unlike the German 98 design that is distinctly different with its H-style front bands and bayonet lug, the Turks just kept all their models the same all the way through the K.Kale production. Here's a Gewehr 98, and you can see the differences right away with the H-band, the bayonet lug, and the front sights. They're all distinctly different from the Ottoman Mausers. I suspect they didn't make these adjustments to the 1903 because it allowed them to use the same bayonet pattern on both rifles and for other continuity reasons. But it ended up working in their favor when all of them needed to be refurbished in the 1930s, and this design continued with the production of the K.Kale 38s. So that basically captures most of the differences with the Turkish 38 Mauser conversions. There were other rifles like the German Gewehr 98s, the Mauser 1890s, the Gewehr 88s, and a variety of other rifles that were converted or in some way changed to fit the Turkish Republic's military needs. There were likely a lot of details that I left out of this video because there just isn't a ton of information in English about these guns once they reach Turkey, and even less information about the conversion period. For example, what did the K.Kale factory system look like in the 1930s? What were the administrative names or government officials associated with the conversion of these rifles in Ankara at that time, or the people that worked day to day on the factory floors to make these? Those are the sorts of details I like to know when researching a weapons development. Now, one piece of information I didn't mention in my previous video was that much of the equipment used to outfit the K.Kale rifle factory was purchased from the Fritz and Werner company in Germany, which allowed Turkey to domestically produce modern smokeless firearms for the first time in the 20th century. I don't know much beyond that, but I will continue to search, learn, and build my own personal knowledge around Turkish bolt-action rifles. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.